Welcome to the new bird room. This room was one heck of a project. It took us exactly 30 days from demolition to airing it out and being ready for Newt to actually be able to move in. So we worked to the bone to get this done kind of as fast as possible. And instead of dilly-dallying and talking, we are just going to hop right on into it and show you the entire room from demolition to finish. So the front entrance of the bird room is one of the most important parts of this room to me, because I am turning the top of this into a memorial spot for my 3 birds that have passed away. The beams of this front entrance used to be like a reddish brown, so I had to sand them completely down, paint them white, and then do my best to paint them to kind of look like birch trees was my goal. I haven't picked up a paintbrush since like middle school, so it was a bit of a process for me with the skill set that I have, but I do think it ended up achieving the look that I was going for. And then combined with the plastic fake plants on top, I do think it achieved the goal that I was going for there in making this look like 2 big birch trees, that kind of making like a forest that is going to be the rainforesty themed bird room. On the side panels here, these are rotating feeder dishes, and they were the biggest pain in the entire room. Nothing in this room took more time than assembling these dishes. It was 3 days to figure out what we were gonna do. So first of all, these bowls came delivered in absolutely terrible condition. They were completely rusted, they were super damaged. This one could not even rotate. It was so warped and not put together properly that the center beam was askew and you couldn't rotate the dish around. It would just get stuck. So I actually had to completely sand these down and remove the metal parts, cut through metal, re-adhere everything, and reassemble them just so that way they would be able to work. So how these dishes work and why they're here is I remove this little clip that kind of keeps it locked in place so that way the birds can't push the bowls out and escape. You just lift it up and you push the bowl out. A little easier with 2 hands. And then the bowls completely rotate out, and you can remove them, change out the food and water, and put it back without ever having to actually enter the enclosure. And my main reason for this is largely just for emergencies. So these food bowls are mainly here for if something ever happens to me and I get rushed to the hospital and the bird is left out in the room, I need someone to be able to come in and feed them, and it's very likely for a bird to become aggressive towards a stranger that they haven't met before, entering their space. So I really don't want to have my kind friend come in to take care of my bird for me because I've been hospitalized and have to get bit or attacked by a bird because they have to go in here in order to feed him. So this way they'll at least be able to access the food and water, make sure they're able to stay alive and be taken care of until I'm able to make it back home or my wife's able to make it back home. This will just provide a safe way for the animals to be fed. Now this doorway, we did assemble the entire frame by ourselves, which was a bit of a problem all of itself, because if you do notice on the bottom, it's not quite showing up that well, but there's 2 additional pieces of wood added to the bottom of this one and 1 on this one, because naturally nothing in this house is square. So we couldn't just make a perfect little door frame and stick it on because it would leave too much of a gap underneath and a bird could just crawl out on one side and the floor would be touching the ground on the other. So we had to kind of modify them, and it was a bit of a process, but not too bad. We made it work. There is a lock on the bottom of the door. I don't have a lock in it yet, but you can put an actual padlock on here so that way they are fully secured. But otherwise, you just unlatch it, and this way the birds can't manage to pry the door apart since they are just simple sliding doors. The mesh on here is a little bit of an experiment. It's not metal, it's plastic. And it's decently durable, I will say. Like, I've kind of checked it out and done what I can to kind of see if it's going to be durable, and I think it'll be okay, but you never know. If a bird suddenly decides that they want this plastic to be ripped apart, they very well might be able to. So it's a little bit of an experiment to see how it goes. This entire floor is separated from all of my other animals. So if something were to happen and a bird were to get out, everything down here is bird safe. There's a room in there that's safe for the birds. And then up there is the door, which would block them off from the rest of the house. so they would not be able to get hurt in any way if they were to escape, which is why I personally feel comfortable trying out this material and seeing what happens. If it doesn't end up working out and they end up chewing it and escaping out of this room, then I will go ahead and find some stainless steel mesh. I just could not for the life of me find any mesh that was made of metal, that was safe for birds, that wasn't an absolutely ridiculous price, not even including the shipping it would take to get it here. So that's why I've decided to try out this plastic, and we will see kind of what happens, keep an eye on it, and test it out. So let's unlatch our lock here. Let's go into the room. So both of the doors do have stoppers on them since there are food bowls on the end. I don't want the doors to be able to slide all the way over and smack them. So the door will automatically come to a stop before it's able to reach the food bowls. There's no way to move it further than that. Those things will not get damaged and they can still rotate no matter what position the door is in. There are food bowls on both sides for the main reason of if multiple birds live in here, it's better to have resources very far apart so that way fights don't end up happening. There's plenty of resources with ample space. If they don't want to be near each other, it's easy for them to separate and not feel like they're fighting over food. The archway is done the same way on the inside as it is on the outside. These fake leaves are made of the same material that most plastic bird toys are made out of, so it is non-toxic if they do decide to chew on it. However, I will be keeping an eye on it because it is sort of looking like plants. I have been supervising Newt in here for the first while just to make sure that he's not going to decide to eat something that he shouldn't. If something happens and I notice, hey, he's chewing on them a bit too much, or I'm getting worried and thinking maybe he's not just ripping it apart, then I would absolutely just remove these. They don't need to be here. It is purely aesthetic purposes, and if it's going to cause harm to my animal, I will take it out. That's not even a question. But as it stands, Newt has been in here for almost a week now, and there hasn't been any issues with him even looking at any of these fake leaves. He hasn't really acknowledged them, hasn't tried to chew on them. He's been entertained with everything else in this room. So far, I think we're doing okay. Now these doors are a little bit different than most sliding doors. Traditionally, the wheels would be on the door itself, and then you'd put the track on the wall. This works the opposite way. So these have the wheels on the wall, and then the track is actually on the door. And I love this for this bird room because you can't pinch a toe. If they were to land up here, it is a flat metal bar that seals off the top. They would really have to try and sit like here before they could potentially hurt themselves. If they land up here while I'm opening the door, they're not gonna get hurt. There is no way for them to squeeze their toes in back there to potentially get hurt. It would take a lot of effort for them to do so. And I honestly believe that this is so much safer than a normal swinging door because birds will just land right on top of it and then you're swinging the door open or potentially trying to leave and shutting the door and you can accidentally close the door on them. It happens a lot. A lot of birds die that way. You can't do that here. You just can't. So I'm honestly really happy with this design. I hope it keeps working the way that I think it's going to. So far, it has been exactly what I needed it to be. Before we even get into any of the fancy stuff in here, the first thing I had to do with this room was completely tear it apart. The walls of this room were a wood paneling that was already falling apart. There were holes in it. It was not great, and I don't even know what material it was made out of, so it had to go, as well as the flooring, which was a vinyl that doesn't even look like it was ever glued down, or at some point there may have been a water damage or something that had happened to the floor that had caused the vinyl to no longer be sticking. So everything had to be torn down, and let me tell you, this was so cathartic. This was like days, or maybe even the day of Mia's passing. I came down here with a sledgehammer and I smashed the walls down and it was exactly what I needed, to be quite honest. So we tore all these walls down, and we were hoping to just be able to build from there, but unfortunately, there was extensive water damage all along the bottom of the drywall that was along this exterior wall here. So we had to remove all of the drywall, and from there we realized that the insulation was not adequate for a basement either. So we kept all of that insulation in there, bought proper moisture resistant, super toasty warm insulation, and put that in there. The moisture resistance is not only for the fact that this is a basement, so they tend to have a bit more moisture risks, but also for the fact that this is a parrot room, it will be humid. We need the walls and all of the base structures to be very resistant to moisture so things don't wear out or get water damage over time. And then we put in a good base of water resistant, thick drywall that will help retain the heat a bit better. Because it is a basement, we don't want it to get cold. We do have really harsh winters. We want to do everything we can to keep this space warm and dry, but able to handle the humidity that a parrot needs. Once those walls were out of the way, I was able to turn my attention to the ceiling. And the ceiling was popcorn ceiling. It did not have asbestos, but it was glued to the top. Sometimes you can get away with just soaking it and it'll scrape off nicely. This was not one of those cases. So what I ended up doing, because I do have a medical condition that does not allow me to have my arms above my head for very long, was instead of fully stripping all of the ceiling off, I decided to scrape the bulk of it and try and just bring it down. So I took a putty knife, scraped it as much as I could to bring the bulk of the bumps of the popcorn ceiling off, and then we puttied over it all. And that was a very long process. It took probably 3 to 4 days of work, maybe even a week, of just leveling out the ceiling. We ended up having to do 2 full coats of putty, and even in some areas, it's not super flat. You can kind of see some bumps, but really the only reason why I wanted to remove that ceiling so bad wasn't necessarily for aesthetic purposes. It was just because this is going to be for birds, and if you have lived with a bird for any length of time, you know they will pick and chew at any little bump that they can find. So being able to have these ropes go close to the ceiling, if there were bumps of popcorn ceiling up there, the birds would chew at it and rip it, and that could be super dangerous if they ingest it. So I wanted to smooth down the ceiling surface so there wouldn't be an ingestion risk, and it could be as safe as a ceiling can be for them. Once it was sanded down and leveled to the best of my ability, we painted over it with a few coats of water-resistant paint, once again to help retain humidity, and also just because putty will just sogify and mush if you re-add moisture to it, so we want to make sure it's resistant to that parrot humidity again, and the paint is going to help form a little bit of that barrier, so the putty isn't all just going to fall off and scrape away with the moisture being in the air. Yes, taking down the ceiling is something that will produce a lot of dust. Anything that we are doing in here is going to produce a lot of dust. So what we did was right off the gate, I covered the air intakes on this entire floor using, it's like a plastic, and you can tape it around the vents, and then it's not able to suck in air into your main ventilation system. And that way, all the contaminated air is not entering the rest of the house and potentially getting to where newt already is. Additionally, over the archway, we did the same thing. We plasticed it off, we taped it, so that way as much of the contaminants as possible would be staying in this space and not going out there. The window at the base of the stairs here we had open, and there is an outside door just before the door that leads upstairs. Both of those were open as much as possible to get any contaminated air straight outside. Part of what we did in the walls was decide to randomly add a window, which seems really redundant because this is an interior wall and there's just another room on the other side of that. But my main reason for this is that birds love natural sunlight. No matter how many UV bulbs and lights you have, nothing compares to having the warmth of the sun come through. So we added 2 windows, we added a whole frame for it, and there is a window on the other side of this wall, right there, that shines the light straight through, and it actually targets these ropes and that bathing corner as well as some of these wall perches depending on the time of the day. So this way when the sun is setting, they can have warm spots that they can come sit and still get some of that direct warm sunlight. Once all the demolition and framework was set in place, that's when we could do some of the more fun aesthetic elements. So all of the wall panels here, you will recognize them from the previous bird room. They are from the old bird room. We did have to buy a few extras to add into this new room because it is 3 times the size of the old one, but all of these dark panels and most of the ones on this wall are from the old bird room. And that is why some of these perches are at very strange low positions. Traditionally, when I'm putting wall perches up, I like having them quite a bit higher because birds feel safe up high. But because these are repurposed from the old room, there were already holes in the panels and I didn't really want to cut them out and have to spend a whole ton more money just because there's a couple holes in them at a height that I'm not super fond of. So I just kept them as perch spots and left it at that. I didn't want to leave just holes because then it's an edge and a bird will chew at it and then all of a sudden my entire panel will be demolished and that's not what I want to happen. The wall panels are adhered in a very basic fashion. These are stainless steel screws. We just screwed them on. I'm sure you're supposed to use an adhesive and I'm sure you can. I was already doing so much demolition and producing so much dust in a house that already has a bird in it that I didn't want to risk bringing in an adhesive and potentially adding more toxicity into the air and have it potentially damage newt. So in every element of making this room, I did my best to keep things as dust-free as possible and as contaminant-free as possible. So that's why all these panels are just screwed on with stainless steel screws. It's nothing fancy. You try and locate a stud and you just screw the panel onto the wall. And then it keeps it nice and firm and sturdy and there's nothing to really worry about. And then the metal that is used is bird safe and its head is sticking out so that way the birds can't find an edge and chew at it. It covers its own hole. It works fine, and honestly, when you look at it from this far away, you cannot really see them with the texture that these walls are, so I don't mind having the screws showing. Doesn't bother me any. Something I changed about this room that I had done in the previous one was I do not have crown molding or baseboards. And the reason for that is that they stained very, very easily. It didn't matter how much I cleaned those baseboards, they just colored so fast, and every single little bit of dust and food debris or feathers would stick to the edges of the baseboards. So I opted to not do any at all this time, and instead what I did was I just caulked the whole thing in every seam, in every corner, and all along the ceiling as well. And I could have left the ceiling, I really could have, but there would be a small edge where the ceiling meets the wall, and as I have said, birds will chew that. I don't want that. So this creates a much smoother barrier that will hopefully prevent the birds from wanting to chew at it, and caulking is quite a firm, squishy texture, so it's kind of actually hard to grab it and pull. So I don't think the birds are gonna be able to get to it. I did use caulking in a similar fashion in the old room, and Mia or Newt never got at it. So I am hopeful that it will stay the same in this room. And I'm hoping it will make cleaning a little bit easier since now I will have a very smooth, rounded edge against the floor instead. So when I sweep, things won't get stuck in cracks. They can just get swept off a beautifully smooth round edge and not get stuck in little crevices. When I thought I was completely done the demolition, I changed my mind and decided I didn't want this door frame because the door frame in the old bird room got chewed up by somebody who is long and green. He just loves chewing on door frames. So I quickly took it off and I switched it out with, I want to say it was aluminum. It was a bird safe metal. It's supposed to be a transition strip for stairs. So it's just a little metal corner bit that you're supposed to use whenever you're switching flooring from one side to the other. So it blends seamlessly. I used it instead as a door frame because it is a bird safe metal that will help protect the corner that would be exposed of this wood paneling, but not be wood that Newt could hang off of and chew apart again. So this way, it will help keep everything safe and stop him from chewing on anything that would be painted or otherwise be not necessarily the greatest thing And also I just really don't want a chewed up door frame. I don't want that. Next, I really wanted to put in this corner. This is plastic rocks, basically. It's supposed to be used for the exterior of a house to give it more curb appeal. They are water resistant and form a nice seamless connection to one another. So when he has a super rigorous bath, the water will splash onto these plastic rocks and not soak into the wood or into the foundation or get damage anywhere that could potentially get water damage. So this just will help not only look really pretty, but help keep the water a little bit more contained. And the flooring we chose is also water resistant, so it will, again, stop any water damage, help the house be a bit more humidity resistant, and provide a very pretty looking room. Again, I do have the plastic leaves here. This is purely because we put these in after the wall panels. I did tell my wife that I would like to have this shape cut out, but in her defense, we were both exhausted. Neither of us wanted to make this many annoyingly shaped cuts. So we just put the wall panels flush and put this on the back of it. So as a result, these do lift up and have a gap behind them. I just didn't want a bird able to crawl back there. So I reused the non-toxic fake plants again here. And again, it's one of those things, I can remove it if I notice any of the birds showing interest in it in a way that I don't believe is safe. And I can always just buy 1,000 tubes of caulking and do what I've done down here, where I have just caulked the little gap. I didn't want to put plants that low to the bottom, so that way when I swept the floor, food and stuff wouldn't get stuck back behind that. This way it'll kind of protect it a bit more and the food won't get caught in the leaves either. So I can always do that all the way around if these plants don't end up working out the way that I like them to. On top of that, I am kind of hoping that they choose to hang off of this a bit. I think it'll be cute. Something that Mia really loved to do was bathe in trees. I used to have a Japanese maple that I would mist down for her, and she would sit on top of it and brush the leaves against her chest, and that was one of her favorite ways to bathe. Unfortunately, I never got another Japanese maple because I had to spray it down so much for her that the tree got burned by the sun. So I don't know, this kind of made me think of her, and I'm hoping maybe the water will splash on it and maybe I'll see a bird hanging off one of these rocks and rolling around in the leaves a little bit. I think that would be fun. But otherwise, I think it looks super cute. And again, both the plastics that these are made out of are non-toxic. So if it does get chewed for any reason, it will not do immediate harm. But again, if I notice somebody swallowing something they shouldn't be swallowing, of course, it will be taken down. This is the same bathtub that was upstairs in the old room. It is the Pioneer Pet Swan drinking fountain. It works beautifully. It is whisper quiet. You don't even hear the water hit the surface. It's just a faint hum. It is one of Newt's favorite things to bathe in. And when he first saw this corner, he lost his mind and started dancing. It was the cutest thing ever. Again, the hardware and shelf are both made of bird-safe material. I'm not so sure if this shelf is going to hold up to the moisture. I may have to lay a towel or something down on here, but we will see what happens. It's not an expensive shelf. I can change it. I have extras if something happens and I learn that it's not as water resistant as I'm hoping it's going to be. The cage is mounted the same way. There is only one cage because there is only one bird. They are well mounted with a set of what would typically be used to make like a floating shelf. So we have those zip tied to it on both sides, and then we also have washers and screws at the back of the thing to help keep it flush to the wall. Again, all of the hardware will be either stainless steel or whatever bird-safe metal was available. The cage is pretty empty, yes. My cages don't get used to house birds for very long. They just get used for sleeping, and if I happen to need to step out of the house, which is never really for more than an hour at a time. So I tend to keep the cages pretty empty because I like to think that they'll prefer to have the enrichment out and about in the room rather than in the cages. And yes, it is easy to clean. You just do this, you can pull the tray out, you can clean it. It's not difficult. A lot of people seem to think because it's up on the wall that it's hard to clean. You can change out the papers very easily, and the grate comes out as well. The only thing that's a little more challenging is wiping down the bars, but I don't know. I'm pretty tall, so I just get a little step stool and I can reach the ceiling just fine. And this cage just needs a water bowl on the inside of it, so they always have access to water overnight. I just pulled it aside for a good like deep clean soak. That gets put in like right here-ish. So we will that will be in there later. Moving down from this, it's not my favorite part of the setup, but Newt loves having an area to throw things. So I take a seagrass mat, which is one of his favorite materials to chew on, and I just tie it to the thing that's holding up the cage. And this way it creates a little hammock, and then he can grab toy parts and he can throw them on the floor, which is his all-time favorite pastime. It's also great for foraging because I can stick pellets inside some of these things. And then if they fall on the floor, they land in with the floor forager, which you can clearly see he has been munching all over with the amount of dust and debris and pellet bits that are all over it. And they just kind of tie in together because any pellets that fall off kind of fall into the forager. And then he forages through the forager to find everything. It's a beautiful system. The ropes, I very much did the same way as I did upstairs, except I did attach some to the ceiling this time. Upstairs, they were all attached to the walls. I haven't done that very much. I also haven't used up all this space yet. I don't know why I'm struggling so hard to utilize all this space. There's a huge empty spot right here that just has a perch, so there's easier access to the food bowls. I have no idea what to put there, so I've just left it there for now. I'll probably put a hook. So there's just kind of a big empty spot. Yeah, I will figure out how to fill it eventually. But upstairs in the old room, virtually all of the hooks were attached into the walls. But this time I put 2 into the ceiling and then 1 more into the wall over there. So the way that these work is pretty simple. This is just an eye-hook screw, which I have put into a stud. I always try to find a stud when I'm using these because they are holding up quite a bit of weight, and adding in birds jumping on them and toys hanging off of them, it's a lot of pressure to put on these hooks to have them just sitting in drywall. So I do locate a stud. And then this is a stainless steel eye hook as well as just a standard, this is like a pear hook clip that you can find with a toy. And then I made these polyurethane discs that are acting as like a chew guard. So that way the hole that I had to drill for the hook is not accessible and cannot be chewed. These little plastic guards just help protect the wall and stop birds from being able to access those sorts of things. It is the exact same for the ones on the walls as it is for the ceiling, always in studs. They all have the same protectors. They all function the exact same way. There is nothing different between them other than the fact that they are on a ceiling instead of the wall. One thing I didn't really like about the old bird room was that the primary perches that the birds sat on were just the ropes, and I ended up buying these little wood coil things to help add more perch texture. And even though they still had like a perch wall and they still had perches available, they primarily sat on these ropes. And although I never saw damage for their feet or anything like that, it always just really bothered me that majority of their day was spent sitting on these same ropes, and there wasn't a ton of variety that they were getting. So this time I took apart the tree stand that I had made, and I used it as a big jumbo branch. So I've just tied it up with rope, and this way they'll have a different texture, there's different widths, and there's different angles all over this branch. And since it's kind of level and higher with the ropes, I'm hoping it'll get used a whole lot more than the perch wall did in the old one, and I'm hoping this will help add just a bit more variety to their foot perching options, and maybe it'll become a favorite spot if I get really lucky. And these are attached the same way as the ropes are. I've just tied ropes to the ends of the branch, and then it's just clipped using a pear hook to the same like fish eye hook that's in the wall. It's not attached in any special way because it's a branch, just as long as the knots are tight. And moving off into the distance over there, you can see Newt enjoying his vegetables. This is the exact same Veggie Corner that was upstairs in the old room. I just took it off the wall and put it down here. This is made of the same material as the protective discs. It's polyurethane, and it is typically used to like refurbish bathrooms or like a shower. So it's very water resistant and it's a very smooth surface, which works brilliantly because vegetables will just scrape off of this very, very easily. You can just spray it down and it comes off as white and as clean as the day I put it up. It doesn't catch every single fleck of vegetable. It is not a perfect system, but it does catch the bulk of the mess. And yes, some still will fall on the floor and some will probably end up hitting that window. And that's fine. I mean, if you own birds, you're going to have to deal with mess. You're not going to be able to contain it all no matter what you do. I've been happy with this system, so I've opted to keep it. It just protects the bulk of the damage from hitting the walls. And then it's just sitting on a floating, I think it was birch shelf that is underneath the edge of the polyurethane, so Newt has not either been able to reach it or has not tried to actually access the wood and damage the shelf at all. The perch wall is not as complicated as some of you guys seem to think. I did it the exact same way in this room. You just grab any random store-bought perches and they will already have screw hardware in them. It's the exact same hardware. You don't do anything fancy to them. They still just have like the screw and where the wing nut would be. The only difference is that you're only using one washer and the screw that's already in the perch. So all you do is find a nice spot on the wall, preferably where a stud is. It'll hold it tighter that way. You drill a hole into the wall and then you just screw the perch in. That's all there is to it. If you miss a stud, the perch will kind of just keep spinning. If that happens, you can just use a drywall anchor and it will hold it in place, and then the perch won't be able to rotate and spin into infinity. If you were really having problems, you could use a drywall anchor and put a little bit of glue or something on the actual screw, and then that way the glue would be completely concealed in the drywall anchor and would not be accessible. I opt to keep one washer on as well. This just helps protect the hole in the wall that I've made so the birds can't chew at it, and it also helps distribute some of the pressure that will be getting put on a perch every time a bird lands on it. So it just kind of prevents the perch from breaking over time with the pressure of being landed on. This perch I have done differently. This was not a store-bought perch. This was one from a tree in the backyard. This one I just screwed a screw straight through. It is a stainless steel bird-safe screw, so I just opted to do it that way. This is not the better way to do it. If you do it this way, there is a very high risk of splitting the wood, and then your perch will basically not be usable. So having the screw going along the length of the perch does work a lot better. Now the lights in this room are basically the same as what was already in here. This room already came with pot lights installed, so I just kept the exact same style of light. It works out perfectly because then all of the electronics and all of that stuff is hidden in the wall. There's nothing really that the birds can access and hurt themselves on. Up on this shelf, we have the security camera and the UV light. I don't know that the light is going to stay here. It's just there because I needed to put it up and I have no idea where to put it. And the security camera is fine where it is. You can get an entire full perspective of the room, be able to see them in the cages at night and check on them throughout the day to make sure that they are safe and not getting into any trouble. Additionally, with the lights, I did have to switch out all of the bulbs. They are all super bright white, running in the color spectrum that is preferred for parrot vision. So it is very white, very bright, as opposed to the dingy yellow that was in here previously. Yes, it does help with recording videos, but the primary reason for having white lights in here is because it is the color range that parrot vision is supposed to be looking through. Over in this corner, we have the air filter. This is virtually the same filter as it was in the old room. I did have to get a new one, not because I wanted to, but because it just randomly decided to stop working. Not just was a little dirty, like it completely would not turn on. It's a Noma air purifier that can connect to the internet and your phone. And some of the last little details, I did add a new vent cover. I wanted to be able to sweep and not have debris get in my vent, so I decided to lift it up off the ground a little bit, so that way when I'm cleaning the floor, I'm not brushing dust up into the air vent. This is obviously made of bird-safe metal. I believe it was stainless steel again. Another thing with this room specifically that I haven't actually ever had a house that's had before is the heat vents are on the ceiling in this room. And I loved this because usually heat vents that I've been around have been on the floor. And that just meant that every time that I swept, so no matter how careful I was, debris was getting into the vent system, which is not ideal, especially when you're trying to keep air quality great. So the air vents being on the ceiling was great for that, but also for the fact that I can kind of put perches near it. And then the birds can sit underneath the vent if they want to get a little extra warm air. And then they can just leave if they don't want it. And I thought that was a bit of a neat system to be able to provide for them. And then lastly, I suppose, is the floor. So there was laminate in here previously, but it was not installed properly. And with the water damage that was on the drywall, we can only assume that it was maybe adhered to the floor at some point in its life, but it was no longer adhered by the time we got to it, and you could just easily roll the entire laminate floor up. And it was just slapped straight on the cement. So with the flooring here, we had to put down proper foam insulation to keep everything warm and to keep everything able to be water resistant. And then we added a few slats of OSB tongue and groove wood to, again, adds a little bit more insulation, lifts things up away from the cement, as well as creating a nice flat surface for us to lay our flooring onto. We did go with vinyl flooring again, like it was originally in here, that has as little texture as possible. Because if I had a textured vinyl floor, poop is going to stick to it. Anything you try and sweep is going to go flying, so I wanted to make sure that it was super, super smooth. I ended up actually having to sweep this floor recently, and it is even better than I thought it was going to be. All of the poop that was on here swept off, completely swept off. There's a little bit of like the white residue that I'll have to mop, but in terms of the like daily sweeping that I do, it was lifting all of the poop off of the floor just by sweeping. And normally in the old floor, I had to get a razor scraper and scrape all the poop off first, and then I could go over it and sweep and mop. So this is going to make things so much faster. And that about does it. I could probably talk about everything we did to this room for days on end. Like I said, it was a month's worth of work. There were a lot of things that got done and had to be done to assemble it. All together with everything we had to buy to make this happen, it ended up costing us $3,000 to $4,000, which was not what I wanted to do. So going to be in credit card debt for a little while, but Newt's happy and he's enjoying the space, so we'll figure it out. We'll make it work somehow. So I think that will about do it. I think I covered the main things that changed in here and kind of the basics of what got done. If there's anything you'd like to know more details about, parts or things that are made of or where we got certain things, feel free to leave a comment down below. I will answer as many as I can. And that will do it for today. So thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.